us. Also, James Summers has been appointed to the commission as well, and he perhaps will be joining us later on or at our next meeting. So I will now call the roll. Please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Boland.
Here.
Commissioner Felt.
Here.
Councilmember Griswold did let us know that she'll be arriving late. Commissioner Hull.
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman.
Here.
Commissioner Parsons. Commissioner Sanderson. Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Commissioner Lernahan.
Here.
Sergeant Bill Clock.
Here.
Commissioner Dolan.
Here.
Commissioner Hess.
Here.
Commissioner Lazarus. Commissioner Webb. And we did receive regrets from Commissioner Margolis, who's not able to join us this evening, but we do have a quorum.
All right. Then I'm ready to approve the consent agenda, which contains minutes and the agenda. Is there a motion to approve? By Woods, seconded by Molly. Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any objections? Abstentions? All right, so we have an agenda. And so we are ready to go right to the public comment.
Hi, good evening, Clark Chernitzky. Some of you may have read a little blurb in the Ann Arbor Observer that came a couple weeks ago talking about some delays in the Detroit-Chicago Amtrak route because of lack of funds, but I'd like to mention that right around the time that hit the mailboxes, there was a press release from the U.S. Department of Transportation announcing the awarding of a $23 million federal grant to make those improvements that were mentioned in the article. This is mainly between Ann Arbor and Battle Creek, especially between Ann Arbor and Jackson. Would entail replacement of 80,000 cross ties, replacement of 15 track miles of railroad track, and then replacement bridges over streets in downtown Jackson. Existing bridges are about 120 years old, and you know what bridges are like in town here. There are a couple of them that are low clearance, and so these will be higher up. So the maximum speed then between Ann Arbor and Jackson will be raised up to 110 miles an hour where the track warrants it. There are some places along the Huron River with curves and so forth, so that'll be probably the existing speed or a little bit faster. Also want to mention that something that a lot of bus passengers have been waiting for years is finally coming to fruition, and that is the crosswalk, the additional pedestrian crosswalk at Pittsfield. And I'm not sure if the signals weren't running the other day yet, but I guess it's imminent. Maybe we'll hear an update later. So the bus passengers complain about this a lot, and people would run across the street. And it's a case where you had to cross 3 streets in order to get across Washtenaw. And you know how long the lights are in Washtenaw. So thank you very much for doing that. Good evening.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? All right, then public commentary is closed. And we have a presentation from the DDA on parking. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having us. My name is Susan Polly. I'm the director of the DDA, and with me is my colleague, Jada Halbrook. We're going to switch back between ourselves. We were told to try to keep it to about 10 minutes. I know that's just the tip of an iceberg, and I know that there's probably a lot of questions, so please feel free to ask us. We were very grateful that you shared questions with Kayla, so it helped to guide us in shaping this. And again, if there are other questions beyond what we're covering, please let us know. So the first thing, I'm going to have Jada talk a little bit about which parking system we're talking about.
Sure, so when we talk about parking in Ann Arbor, there are three major players, if you will. The University of Michigan constructs and operates its own parking system in and around the campuses, including in the downtown area.
And Steve, if we've gotten the numbers wrong, we took it just a little, okay. Okay.
The DDA constructs and operates parking within its parking area, about 8,000 spaces. This is on-street metered parking as well as structures and lots off-street. The City of Ann Arbor operates the residential parking permit program for the near downtown neighborhoods. They handle enforcement and then any parking that exists outside of our parking area. This map is a map of the DDA parking area. That shape in the middle is the DDA boundary, that kind of funky shape that you maybe have seen before. But throughout the entire parking area, the DDA manages parking in structures, lots, and on-street. So on-street would include any of the paid parking at meters, as well as any other uses on the curbside, such as loading zones.
So a little bit about the DDA. In 1975, the state of Michigan created enabling language that communities could use to create DDAs. We've been hard at work since the 80s, working to strengthen downtown, working to encourage private reinvestment. A lot of our projects are infrastructure-based. In 1992, the DDA took over management of the public parking system for a few reasons, but one of the most was a very pressing problem with deterioration in the garages. We're not a parking authority. We're a development authority. So we took a very different approach when we took over the parking system. A key component is to understand how parking works to serve the larger goals, and in our case, our mission of the core area and its vitality. A big point of change, which doesn't sound so radical today, but was at its time, was that we're not operating parking for parking's sake. We're not doing this just so we can make money off the parking system. The goal of parking actually is a larger goal, which is vibrancy. From the very beginning, we realized as downtown advocates that it's really a menu of options that are likely going to be most successful, parking being only one of many. And demand management started before we even had the words for it, which was based around elements such as convenience and pricing. If you give people choices, they'll make choices that best serve them. And perhaps most radical of all was to understand that parking was part of a larger transportation system. Too often we polarize. It's parking versus buses, for instance. Well, beginning 20 years ago, we began to argue that it's all together a part of a system that has to work together. And because we saw parking as part of transportation, now in our 20th year, we've been funding transportation projects and programs using those parking dollars. For instance, we continue to supplement service on the two primary routes for many of our downtown employees, the Packard route and the Washtenaw Avenue route. We now have about 1,000 bike parking spaces downtown paid for by the other kind of parking. We've been working to support initiatives such as Air Ride, Night Ride, Express Bus service. Again, the goal is to create and continue to expand a menu of options for people. And again, parking is a piece of this. 20 years ago, we're going to be celebrating a lot this year, was the creation of the Get Downtown program and the Go Pass. Our initial partnership included the Chamber, but the remaining partners remain the DDA, the City of Ann Arbor, and AATA. The goal of this program has been to provide people with information about their commuting options and to make the options include tools like the Go Pass. We had a CMAQ grant to start the program, the Go Pass program, and starting in '02, the DDA took over funding. We remain the primary funder, but an important part of this is to get the employers in downtown to help contribute some of the funds. And then in 2012, the program shifted over and it's now part of AATA. 20 years later, we have some data that we can point to with a great deal of pride. There is a particular benefit to some of the user types in downtown, such as restaurant and IT. The City of Ann Arbor is a strong user of the Go Pass. Some of the benefits for the small independent businesses, it is for many of them the only benefit they can offer to employees. We have been successful in freeing up parking for customers and visitors. The last survey done by Get Downtown reported to us that approximately 1,200 vehicles a day aren't in downtown because our employees are able to come to work in a different manner. And of course, there are the environmental benefits to downtown and having fewer cars. Another radical idea that we took on, because the parking system for us was just a tool in a toolbox, was to understand that that curb has a goal, which is, for us, the vibrancy and the unique quality of downtown, which is walkability. So we add and remove and move parking and loading zones based on the changing needs in downtown and also in support of the transportation plan. An example of adding parking was done with our 5th and Division project, which is now about, I guess we did that in 2011, 2012. We added parking to 5th Avenue and to Division to create a traffic buffer for pedestrians because so many people saw those streets as fairly vehicular-based, like freeways, and putting a buffer between people and the traffic helps to soften that experience as pedestrians. It's also a really important benefit for small independent businesses, and we saw a plethora of new businesses opening up their doorways, not just near, but actually on 5th and Division when we added those parking spaces. And we follow a design guideline, a design manual that the city and the DDA work together, where we've outlined street frontage and the context that is happening on that particular section of that particular street in downtown, as well as delineating a particular vehicular focus. So for instance, some streets really work well for buses, and we should amplify and encourage transit on those streets. Some streets really have an opportunity to develop more modality for bicycles. On all downtown streets, on all of them, including now Huron and all the others, pedestrians are to be encouraged. We, DDA, as you know, you've heard from us about our People-Friendly Streets projects. An important component of this is pedestrian safety and comfort, as well as all the other elements such as encouraging business and promoting green design. But among the elements that are in the toolbox for these streets are the parking, the loading zones, and the other curb uses. So as we design these streets, we're designing what the curb uses can be. An important element of that, back to Jada, we're going to get into the economics of parking. We had that question about parking. A report that I was able to discover, I think it's just a couple years old, it was trying to outline what they saw as the value of an on-street parking space and why the removal of a parking space has particular damage to the small businesses nearby. And what they were able to quantify, this is Vancouver, Washington, was the turnover in their particular downtown was more than 5 times a day per parking space. The retail sales that they could directly correlate to that parking space was about $175, $176 a day. And if you added up all the shopping days, they saw the value of a parking space is $53,000, which doesn't sound like a lot unless you're that small business who's working to pay your rent, working to pay your employees, and working to promote yourself. That parking space has enormous value to them.
So we're going to stick with parking economics for a moment here. We've included some information from fiscal year 19 for revenues and expenses for that year. And expenses include operating expenses, debt payments that are made, and dollars that are allocated to capital projects or restoration and maintenance of the facilities. Any net revenues that we have are saved. We save them because we know we often have large capital projects coming ahead or purchases like equipment. We have a very robust maintenance and restoration schedule, especially for the parking structures. We work with engineers to create a 20-year plan. We update that plan every 3 years, so we're always able to plan for and budget for big restoration projects that are needed in those facilities. Again, kind of just reinforcing our commitment to maintaining them to a high level. The parking system is public property, so no taxes are paid. The revenues and expenses per space are included on the bottom of the page, and you'll see kind of a range there, and that depends on the type of facility, staffing levels, the type of equipment that's there, also whether that facility has any debt or not that we're paying off. After the DDA was able to stabilize the parking system, we began transferring dollars to the city's general fund. We transferred 20% of the gross revenue from the parking system to the city. And in fiscal year 2020, that's expected to be close to $4.5 million. We, the DDA, are responsible for 100% of the cost to construct new structures or add on or develop new lots. The DDA pays all of the bond issuance costs if we're using bonding to pay for the capital work. We also pay a 3% overhead cost to the city for their issuing the bonds on our behalf. Once constructed, we operate them, but the facilities all become assets of the city. And an important thing to remember is that we operate the parking as a system. There are structures that are older. There's no longer debt. So net revenues from those facilities are put towards some of the newer facilities that maybe still have high debt payments. Something you may have heard, we have an expansion at the Ann Ashley parking structure. Our goal is to support future reuse of some of the surface lots that are in that corridor just west of Main Street. We are hoping that if we're able to add some capacity at that Ann Ashley structure, that those lots would be developed into a higher, better use than just parking cars. This would be happening along with other work that the DDA is undertaking in that area. I believe my colleague spoke to you about the infrastructure and street work that they're doing on First Ashley and the Huron area. And besides adding spaces to Ann Ashley, the project would include one new elevator in the southwest corner of the facility. We would be opening up the stairwells, adding glass and more light into those existing stairwells, making improvements to the pedestrian entrance at Miller, and also adding quite a few sustainability components, such as capacity for EV charging units, a green roof, and additional covered bike parking.
And an element that I think many of us are also pretty excited about is we'll be adding the anchoring system on the rooftop for a solar electric array. And some of the dialogue with the Sustainability Office is around their giving us guidance on how big a solar electric array it should be. And so that's a piece of the puzzle that is yet to be determined. But if we can get the rooftop, the rest of it can fall in place. So that is in 10 minutes, a short whirlwind tour of the public parking system. And we'd be delighted to answer any questions that we may have missed, and happy to talk about parking a little longer if you'd like.
So when I was reading these materials before the meeting, that $21.7 million budget for the 375 new spaces in the Ann Ashley lot really hit me, because I know we only have like around 2 million, so like a tenth budgeted toward active transportation. And I was just trying to figure out how we reconcile those numbers. I know the values of the city are pushing toward Vision Zero, and it seems like, I mean, on the surface of it, it seems like we're really subsidizing cars with that kind of investment.
So in complement, as my colleague Jada pointed out, the garage is being pursued at the same time we're pursuing improvements, the People-Friendly Streets projects on First Ashley and Huron. Adding the bikeway on William, that is a $17 million investment.
Okay, that
So
helps,
I
that
don't
helps.
know that
Yeah.
it's completely comparable,
Yeah,
but the goal of this is a strategy toward an investment in infrastructure.
Yeah.
This has not been an exercise in responding to what some perceive as a parking demand downtown. I think we, among all the others, believe that finding strategies around multi-modalities is the way to go. This instead is geared at trying to encourage the reuse. The next building cycle, and we're ending at one building cycle, there'll be another one maybe after we finish the garage. That building cycle, we're hoping to see some of those surface lots go away. For instance, on Main Street, right at Main and Ann, there's a parking lot. There really shouldn't be a parking lot on Main Street. The Brown Block is an entire city block, and the opportunities from that much real estate is really something important to consider. It's the goal of seeing those put to better and higher uses, but also this is being done in collaboration with First and Ashley. For instance, the Ann Ashley Garage is bringing a water main and sidewalk improvements and so forth. Again, knitting it together with the People Friendly Streets investment.
Yeah, I think that really helps. I keep getting confused about like where this 21.7 million comes from. I know that you said that 100% of it was DDA. And so is that like the accumulation of parking revenues, or what is that?
So we're asking the city to issue a project bond. 85% of it would be bonded, and so it's like taking out a mortgage on a house. You bring some cash to the closing of your house, and then you take out a mortgage on the rest. Well, the garage, it's somewhat similar. We would be putting 15% down as cash, as fund balance toward it, and then over time, we'd be paying off the debt service for that bond issuance. The payments would be made from two sources. Every new garage has had an investment from our TIF. That's a tax increment financing that's generated from new projects in the downtown. But we also have been shifting the parking system over all this time, so the users of the parking system pay for the parking system. So though the debt has some TIF involved in it for the new asset, the operations and all of that is paid for 100% by the users. So the issue for some who don't use the parking system, you're not going to be paying for the parking system. We ask that people, be aware as we raise their rates, some of their dollars that are going back into the parking system would be for those new spaces, in addition to the debt service, in addition to giving the city some funds for municipal operations.
Thanks, that really helps clarify things for me.
Yes.
Thank you, this was really helpful. I really love the field guide that we got with the, breaking down all the different things. I found that really helpful. So you mentioned that there's research about the value of parking spaces to small businesses. I know there's similar research out there around the value of increased bike transportation and increased foot traffic for small businesses. And I'm wondering if you, in other contexts where maybe you don't have such a friendly audience to bikes and people on foot, if you bring that research into your considerations as well, and if you use that as part of your...
Absolutely, and our opportunity ahead is to try to find the metrics. As a very small bite-sized piece, a few years ago, we stole an idea for those on-street bike racks. I think it was from downtown Los Angeles. Seemed like a great idea, worth stealing. And so with an intern, we documented the amount of bike parking that was happening that summer. And we were able to share with the adjacent business, you had this many more potential customers as a result of having this, I think it's 16 parking spaces. We were also able to do some small amount of interviews with customers, and it seemed from what we were hearing that some of the customers that were spending the most were those that were arriving by bicycle. We don't have enough substantive research since then, but we were able to expand the on-street system over some initial skepticism, because on-street spaces, businesses love them. We now have demand for it beyond the number of racks. So we absolutely hear you and are going to be in a quest, especially with the new bikeway, to understand how we can document it, because the next bikeways may not be as easy. There may not be as many willing adjacent businesses. So we know we need to find the metrics, and that'll be a part of what we're going to do.
Great, thank you.
Thank you again for presenting. I enjoy when you guys come in. I always learn stuff. And I just want to make it really clear. So users are basically paying for the parking. I mean, that's the nutshell. And so the other thing that I learned is that UM actually has like 3.5 more parking spaces than the DDA. So maybe I should be asking my questions to the UM, right? And as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, UM doesn't have nearly as many on-street parking spaces or parking structures that deal with transportation as a network as the DDA does. So
I would actually ask Mr. Dolan to speak, because the integration of transit and parking falls under a single
and
office.
that might be beyond the scope of us at this table, but that parking question is obviously bigger than the DDA, but thank you very much for what you presented.
And just as a small aside, and I'm going to ask Steve to speak, just today we were talking about Jada and my colleague Amber coming back from conferences, and that curb use just keeps coming up. And one of the parts that we're really interested in is that kind of flexibility in being aware that we don't know everything that we're going to need to know in 5 years and in 10 years. So doing more deeper dive assessments, doing more understanding of what the uses are, creating plans, and then understanding that the plans are going to have to keep flexing. And a small example is ATA begins whatever, its work on its master planning over the next few years. The location of transit stops. That's an example of a change that we should be sure we're accommodating when we get there. We just don't know yet until they've done their planning how expansive the system may or may not be and how many more spaces they may need for bus staging. But it's a need that we need to keep an eye on and make sure that the on-street curb remains flexible for their purposes as well as all the others.
Steve, did you want to?
Well, I think you were good, right? Were you following up with another question, or?
Oh, it might not be a question, it just might be I don't know, a future agenda item, or where do we draw the line between city and university and DDA? One of the questions that I was drawn toward in terms of parking is how much does it cost taxpayers for a space? And studies have shown, at least in the 70s and 80s, that it was really expensive to subsidize a space. It sounds like we've mitigated that and we're balancing that well. I don't know how that functions in terms of university parking, which takes up a fairly large portion of the Ann Arbor metro area. I mean, if you look at a Google map, it doesn't take long to understand that parking is a substantial use of land space. And so that question of subsidized parking, or how do we do it, again, I don't know if this is the body to do it, because I don't know where the University of Michigan versus the Transportation Commission and the City of Ann Arbor divides. But if the DDA is doing things that are net neutral for all goers and encouraging all sorts of transportation options, and the university is continuing to subsidize parking, that's a conflict, I think, that can't be overcome. We got to get on the same page somehow. I guess, I don't know. It's just me with a little rant, I suppose, but, yeah.
You could develop that into a future agenda item if you want. So I have a question, which is sort of what the future is for our aging population, that it will be in need of more and more handicapped and accessibility parking, and whether radical ideas like maybe a quarter of all the on-street parking should be handicapped, since having it in structures doesn't necessarily meet the needs of that population, who then have to walk or get somewhere. This population is exploding, unfortunately, and it's sort of covered a little bit, but even in the guide that you have, it shows where the handicap parking is for the structures, but not on street, at least not that I could figure out.
Yes, we have a layer, on our website, we have what we call an interactive parking map, where it's a map of downtown and you can toggle off and on based on what you're looking for. Bike parking, hourly parking, flat rate parking. We do have a layer that includes the on-street accessible spaces.
Okay.
And it's, if you zoom in, you can kind of get a sense of where on that block it is. It's towards one end or the other, towards the middle. And as we touch streets for street improvement projects, for any kind of resurfacing work, any work that's happening, we really examine if there are spots on the street, if they need to be moved. I can't speak to how they were placed in the past, but when we do touch a street, we work to move those spaces towards the end so they're closer to a curb cut. Think about where people on that block are going. So we are, actively thinking about that.
And certainly, as you come to downtown, or anybody who's listening to the CTN broadcast, if you see an area that you're in downtown and there isn't a space where you need to be, we can't promise you one on every block face, but we want to be sure that we're meeting the needs. Again, as downtown changes and our customers have new needs, we want to be sure that we're hearing about it. So please, if we can convey to people to get a hold of the DDA and let us know if there's a block face where you're finding that there isn't a space available, let us know and we'll look to see what we can do.
Okay? Yes.
Hi. I was wondering if you could give us a sense of feedback you're getting in terms of folks that are now using apps to pay for their parking. I know I'm over at the university, and the parents who are coming in, they think that that's one of the greatest things, because they used to have to run out and pay the meter, and now they can do it from almost any place, I think.
Sure. So about 2.5 years ago, we worked with a company, Passport, to create our own private label, if you will, parking app. It's ePark Ann Arbor, and it's a mobile app. You download it once, you can enter card information in, maybe 60, 90 seconds or so. And then after that, anytime that you park, you can just make a note of your space number and pay in 10, 15 seconds with the app. And since we have introduced that app, we've seen continued growth. Right now, it's about 60% of the people who pay with credit cards in the on-street system are paying with that app. So that's definitely continuing to grow. We see the highest adoption rate over on the campus area, but we continue to see that grow. It just is a very easy way to quickly pay for parking. Gives you the little reminders if you need to move your car, so it's been good.
We're about out of time, if there's any other
I have one
questions?
more quick
Yes.
question. So this builds a little bit on Linda Diane's question about how you're tracking the need for accessible parking spaces. I'm wondering if you, so I love the on-street bike racks, and I wonder if you have a way of capturing sort of the places where more bike parking is needed. So for example, where you have a lot of people locking their bikes to trees or to signposts. There's one restaurant in particular I can think of that every time I pull up there, I'm just sort of like, how is there no place for me to put my bike? And so I'm just wondering if you're capturing that and how.
Yes, and it also helps to have all of you as advocates to let us know. One of the great challenges for us is the increasing demand for sidewalk space. So where we have had the opportunity to add in a sidewalk rack, we do, keeping in mind that there are these other users that want also sidewalk. And so we've been increasing the number of on-street racks where we can. So that restaurant and perhaps some others really need maybe an on-street rack application. Many people bicycle seasonally, and that's a great use of a parking space. As, again, I think it's 16 customers are tied up right in front of them. So maybe offline, if you could let me know where you're seeing it, that's where we've gotten the best ideas, are the people who are bicycling, trying to find that space. Let us know so we can prepare. That'd be great.
Anything else urgent? Okay.
Thank you for
very
the
much.
opportunity. Appreciate it.
You'll be hearing from us more.
Thank you. Thanks for your help.
All right, so we're moving on to business and the crash data reporting. We have a final draft in front of us.
I think next we actually have the transportation plan presentation. Should be next on your
I'm sorry,
agenda.
you're right. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah.
So that Eli can,
View screen.
welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I'm Eli Cooper, Transportation Program Manager with the city, and I have Stacy Meekins, our project manager from Sam Schwartz. I believe we spoke with you several months ago. We have been actively engaging with the community, getting input for the planning process. Stacy's going to walk you through a series of slides, and then I'll come back with a brief comment too about the planning process. With no further ado, Stacy.
Thanks, Eli. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm just here to give you an update on the process that we've been going through and what we've been hearing in particular from the public. And then I'll get into the draft values and value statements that we've come up with so far and an overview of our next steps. So I know that you guys have had access to the public engagement results, so I'm not going into these in depth, but I did want to give you all high-level overview in case you haven't had a chance to review those, and just let you know what we've been up to and what we've been hearing. So we posted an initial survey this spring. Probably it went live in April. We immediately got a great response. We couldn't believe how many people responded within 2 weeks. So between the online survey and an in-person, on-the-street intercept survey that we did at the transit center, we got nearly 2,000 responses. And the breakdown of who was responding to that survey, you see on your right. 61% both live and work in Ann Arbor, but we were capturing people who just live in Ann Arbor or just work in Ann Arbor, and even some who don't live or work in Ann Arbor. And one of the questions we asked them was just basically how do you choose to get around, whether that's a school work trip, which is what we're showing here. We also asked about other trips, though, and so what you're seeing here is the breakdown of how people choose to get to work or to school based on their residence and or work location. So you see a pretty big difference between those who both live and work in the city and those who only live or only work. And there's a much more, a more balanced distribution between the modes for people who both live and work in the city. It's understandable that they are probably closer to their work, so they have more opportunity to use biking or walking, but also a healthy transit share as well. Another question we asked was, what impacts your decision as a first choice to get around? And time was by far the leading factor in how people choose the mode that they're going to use. In addition to the survey, we did a series of focus groups. We did two just capturing the general public, and then we did one focused on the senior population and one targeting a minority population. All told, we had 30 participants in those focus groups. And we heard things across the board. This is just a sampling of the challenges that people outlined for us. I think one of the themes that we heard throughout this process was that multimodal options are key in Ann Arbor. Some of the challenges you see here, finding a non-auto means to get around while bringing along my child and personal belongings. A lack of understanding of crosswalk signals or signs and signaling, and a need for consistency there. Pavement quality, better integration of the different modes so people can transfer between different modes was important. Again, just wanting to get around without a car, better biking conditions, an interest in more frequent bus service, and a comment about the cost of auto insurance premiums. And then in early June or mid-June, I guess, we went to the public with an open house and a pop-up meeting. Hopefully some of you were able to come and see us there. We captured 81 participants from 14 different zip codes throughout those two events. The pop-up meeting was held at the Mayor's Green Fair. We did several different activities with people there, and one of the things that we asked them was, what does a great street look like? And we had different categories. We had downtown business district streets, commuter corridors, and residential streets. And so I'm going to go through these one by one just to show you up close what were the most popular great streets of the ones that we presented. And we asked them why. What is it about this street that makes it a great street? And where would you like to see something like this in Ann Arbor? So these are the themes that came out. What you see here is called a shared street. And this is a space where vehicles and pedestrians and bikes and everybody using the street can share the same space the pavement surface might be differentiated between what is typically the pedestrian space versus the vehicle space, but the level of the pavement is common across all those different spaces. So these tend to be a lot slower trafficked, lower volume streets in terms of cars, better for accessibility because you don't have tripping hazards, and just kind of creates a very unique atmosphere. So the streets that you see that people would like to see those include Maine, Liberty, State, and Washington, were just some of the ideas. And then in terms of a commuter corridor, this image had the most votes. People were really drawn to, I think in particular, this two-way bike facility. And you see on the left the streets in Ann Arbor that people thought that this would work well. Ashley, Division, Plymouth, Washtenaw, and Maine. And then in terms of residential streets, people thought that the street that shows a two-way bike facility, despite it being a one-way street, was something that they'd like to see in Ann Arbor. I think what people what resonated with people here was just the bikeway connectivity. We also asked people about the values that they think Ann Arbor needs to embrace in this transportation plan. And this had actually been a continuation of the outreach that we had done with the Community Advisory Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee, which you'll see in a moment. So this has been kind of a refining process throughout. And in terms of the Community Advisory Committee and Technical Advisory Committee, we have 50 people, 50 organizations, and plus I think a little higher, 51 on the email list. We have 27 members confirmed. On the Technical Advisory Committee, we have 22 members. Those are representing city and partner agencies. So we've been hearing from them as well. We've also been hearing from you. I know that you all worked hard to develop those reports on the different E's that we have reviewed and been incorporating into the values and goals, and now moving into the strategies that we're beginning to develop. And so we were here today meeting with the Technical Advisory Committee, and tomorrow we'll be meeting with the Community Advisory Committee to further develop strategies organized by the E's that you guys have already delved into. So this is the results of the values activities that we've done with both committees and the public, and where we ended up was settling on these 5 values that will start to organize the transportation plan. So I'm going to go through these one by one. We've refined these a bit with staff, and again, we're taking it to the Community Advisory Committee tomorrow, and we'll continue to refine it as necessary. And so we've developed these draft value statements that define what that value means. So safety, for instance, means Ann Arbor is a safe city where everyone participates in creating an environment in which people feel confident and comfortable traveling. And mobility, what does that mean? It means that Ann Arbor prioritizes moving people and goods efficiently, making it easier for people to choose sustainable modes of transportation. Accessibility. In Ann Arbor, people of all abilities, stages of life, income, and racial and ethnic backgrounds have equitable access to the places where they live, work, and play. Healthy people, sustainable places. Ann Arbor's transportation system supports a healthy population, sustainable environment, and robust economy while celebrating and enhancing our unique quality of place. And finally, regional connectivity. Ann Arbor works to expand travel options throughout the region and integrate its transportation system with wider regional networks. So with those values as our organization, we have developed draft goals that have gone out to both committees. And as I mentioned already, we're going to be working with the Community Advisory Committee tomorrow to flesh out the strategies moving forward. So what I didn't mention is we've spent a good deal of time this spring and summer also analyzing the existing conditions in Ann Arbor, understanding what it is we're working with as a starting point to then start developing those strategies of how we move forward. So a couple of our next steps, we are tentatively have a pop-up meeting at the Peace Neighborhood Center October 15th. Just need to confirm that with them and our staff. We will be doing a couple more online engagement activities this fall. First one would be focused on bicycle use and the vision for the bike network, and then focusing on specific intersections and corridors that we want to delve into more deeply and fleshing out the strategies. And then I believe Eli is going to talk a little bit more about plan adoption.
Thank you, Stacy. And so my understanding that questions have arisen related to the final stages of the process. So we're in the mid stages with values formation and additional public engagement, technical work. At the end of the planning process, there will be a document called a plan that will be embraced by the City Planning Commission. The City Planning Commission has, and as you could well imagine, we anticipate continuing to have a fulsome public engagement process and working with the Transportation Commission to develop the plan that we present to the Planning Commission. But since the Transportation Plan Update is a document of the City Master Plan, it has to follow the statutory process for plan adoption. Commission considers the plan. They present it to the City Council for authorization to release the plan to the county and adjoining communities for their review. So there's a draft plan. It's embraced by the City Planning Commission. They request that the council forward it to the county and adjoining communities. There's a prescribed period of about 2 months that they can consider and provide feedback to the commission. The City Planning Commission would take that input and decide whether any adjustments are needed to that draft document prior to it being forwarded to a public hearing in Ann Arbor. So there's a meeting to the council, there's a transmittal to a variety of interested parties, there's a potential revision to that document, and then the Planning Commission convenes a hearing. The hearing may result in input that has the plan adjusted yet again. So this is well after the staff and public process have resulted in that draft document. As you can see, this is a fairly substantial process, and it'll be time-consuming, but that will continue to provide updates to the commission, and obviously the public will be aware through the project website, as well as following the planning process. The comments that we receive from the public, if it results in a change, the commission will then approve the plan. And that's not the last step, because once the commission approves the plan in the city of Ann Arbor, it will be forwarded to the city council. At which point, the city council has, in essence, 2 options. The first is to approve the plan, and if that's their action, the plan is then put into effect. The City Council also has the option to reject the plan. If the council opts to reject the plan, which has been forwarded through the statutory processes, they have an obligation to provide a statement of objections. And then again, I'm not an attorney, but referencing the directory language in the state planning statute, the City Planning Commission shall consider and revise the plan to address the council's statement of objections. at which point the document will be then forwarded back for public hearing and then back to city council. So that could be, and I emphasize could be, an iterative process. I've been involved with non-motorized plan adoption, the city transportation plan adoption about a decade ago, and there is perhaps some input that comes back from council. In some cases there has been, some cases not. And this is one of the elements and one of the responsibilities of the various official bodies of the city. So we anticipate continuing to coordinate closely with the Transportation Commission in framing and drafting the plan that we will then bring to the commission, and when I say the commission, meaning the City Planning Commission, in following through the statutory process that I just described. At this point, I'll ask if there are any questions about either the process or for Stacy about some of the public engagement and process that we've presented here this evening.
Thank you. I really appreciate the detailed explanation of the process, because this has been something I've been on, I think this is now a year I've been on the commission, and I have not understood, but now I understand much better. So, given the reality of the current political situation in Ann Arbor, are you planning for how much planning is happening for the potential of a rejection by city council at this point?
Well, I appreciate the question, and as a professional planner, what we're focusing on is listening carefully to the community. We believe that if we use the best of our abilities in listening, incorporating the values of our community in the project, as well as our professional expertise in transportation planning, transit, we have a variety. You saw 70, 80 members that are dedicated participants in the Community Advisory and Technical Advisory Committee. My aspiration is that the plan reflects the values that are shared by all, including the council, so I'd rather not speculate on assume a rejection. I'd rather really focus energy on creating the best plan that's reflective of our community and having it reviewed by the commission and the council. And if there are issues, if we didn't hear something clearly, or if during the process things have changed, we would be open to, as the statute provides for, a statement of objections and the opportunity to respond to those in the process.
Thank you.
So when about would this be going before council?
So at this point, I'd refer those who are at home to the project website. It's the Moving Together Towards Vision Zero. There is an image that shows a schedule that would have us going forward to council mid-2020, so about a year from now.
Yes.
I'm just learning how to use this mic. Thank you for that presentation. I really enjoyed it. I'm wondering, so that we get a lot of rich and diverse feedback, how are you disseminating information about online surveys and pop-up meetings?
So the information that we receive is all posted on the project website, including agendas and summaries of meetings. So again, we pride ourselves in being transparent, and that the variety of participants, question came up, who's on the committees? We've now posted all of the invitees to the committees on the project website. If we need to do more to be transparent, please let me know. The intent is to be fully forthcoming, and again, it's the diversity in opinion and perspective that helps to strengthen the policy direction as we move forward.
Thank you.
Brad?
Two quick questions and then I guess a statement, seems to be my pattern. I just want to clarify that when people indicate time as important and convenient as important, that doesn't necessarily mean mode. I was running late tonight. I forewent an errand I needed to run by car because bike is my fastest way. So I would say time and convenient is more important, but I'm going by bike. It's just one of those minor things. I guess that's not a question. The Intercept survey results were striking in that they were so skewed, but it sounds like perhaps these were done at the bus station. Is that accurate?
Yes, the Intercept survey was done at the transit station.
Okay.
Transit center.
And how much does that weigh in? Because that seems odd. Like, you could just go to a bicycle parking structure and get a whole bunch of people to say, I bike in, and you go to a parking structure and say, I drive in, like, of
Yeah.
course it's skewed.
It's just one, we're not like looking at that and making decisions based on that alone. It's
Okay.
one way that we get that diversity of opinions.
Okay, I'd like to see broader modes represented, because, I mean, it skews the data, right? That you are literally talking to transit folks about their preferred mode.
We also, at the same time, put little flyers in the, on people's bikes throughout downtown to direct them to the online survey.
Okay. Okay. And I guess the other statement, and this is just a statement, Eli, I know it sounds like you are maybe beholden to a certain process that you have to go through. But I'm gonna quote a council member who said this recently about something very different. He said, "This sounds bananas to me." The Transportation Commission is not going to see this draft or comment on it in any meaningful way, maybe at all. That, to me, seems bananas compared to how much planning is going to be involved, compared to how much other folks are involved. I understand Linda Diane is the representative from this body, but a year and a half ago, I was so afraid that we, as a body, would have to write the transportation plan. And the exact opposite is true. I have zero input, other than through Linda Diane. I don't get to see drafts. I don't get to steer this, other than the fairly minor involvement that is available to the public. It, quote unquote, seems a little bit bananas that transportation is shut out on this.
So what I would encourage for you, other members of the commission, and the public is to watch and participate. That I would agree with you, if we were going to go off in a ivory tower and prepare a plan and not consult with and provide the commission full opportunity, that would be bananas. But what I'm here to assure you is that this process will be fully transparent, that documents that are drafted will be made available for public review, that as a necessity of administering a complex process with a variety of input stakeholders, the commission has a representative that speaks on behalf of the commission, but each of the commissioners, as well as all the citizens at home, a draft of the report will be posted on the website, and we will take comments. Those comments will be carefully considered, and we will review them in kind. Your observation about, well, the intercept survey was done at a transit facility. The next online survey will be a bicycle-based survey. By the time we're done, a year and a half of public engagement, everyone will have had an opportunity to engage in the planning process. And I'm specifically looking to the commission, say, we understand that the process that I described is a statutory process, and it does not include the unique attribute of the city of Ann Arbor and its role of its Transportation Commission. I would encourage the Transportation Commission to work with the Planning Commission in the event that you feel that the Planning Commission is not accurately representing the information that you have engaged with us to put in the draft document. Not trying to say, oh, they're not, they are, they're not. I just think the opportunity between appointed bodies to coordinate information, yeah, at the end of the day, there's a statutory process that does not acknowledge, but there are public engagement processes, public hearings, and opportunities for the commission to hear from the Transportation Commission as they go through that final ministerial adoption process. That's the best I can say is, trust me that this is going to be, as it is currently, the agenda for tomorrow morning's meeting, the materials that the CAC will go through are already posted, and once the summary is produced, it too will be posted right next to the summary of the first CAC meeting. Come along, enjoy the ride, and if we're not doing our job, let us know.
So is that statutory process state level, or?
Yes.
Okay.
PA 285 for those keeping track at home.
So a potential future agenda item is to talk about influencing that statutory process for the next go-around, which would be, what, 10 years or so, or?
Well, again, in terms of, if you will, the statutory process, that's prescribed in state law.
Right.
How the Transportation Commission, the City Planning Commission engage in the substance of the document. So this is a lot about process. What
Right.
you're interested in is the substance. What are the elements within there? And again, as staff to the city, we are going to be working closely with the commission to make sure that we're on point in the same way that Stacy's saying, here's what we heard, did we miss anything?
But looking at the future, we might want to influence that in 10 years. So-
If you're unsatisfied with the way it works now, you might want to do that.
Is it the case that, so drafts will be shared publicly, so we, the Transportation Commission, could decide, once there's a draft available, that we want to put that on our agenda to talk about it at that point,
Yep.
right? There's nothing stopping us from doing that.
One of the responsibilities of the commission, I believe, is to make advice and comment to the city council. And so that I described at least 2 or 3 formal public hearing processes in front of the City Planning Commission. And in those processes, you can weigh into the Planning Commission as well as take the opportunity to make comments directly to the City Council as they consider the document that you might have commented on, either supportive or otherwise.
And if I may add something too, I mean, one of the reasons why Stacy and Eli are here before you today is to kind of keep you abreast of the process, right? That's the whole idea, that we've kind of reached some major milestones in the process. We've kind of cleared the first round of engagement. We're working on these value statements. And so we want to keep you informed, so then that way we can get your input as a body and kind of keep you engaged in this process all the way throughout. There is a possibility in the future for us to, similar to the line of questioning that just came up, where, this body could make a recommendation of approval to, city council, and that would probably be shared with the planning commission as well before their consideration too. So, I think what Eli spelled out earlier was kind of the statutory requirement, but there, some other paths that still involve this commission as well.
Just real quick follow-up. Eli, thank you so much for your candor and your attention to detail. I very do much appreciate it. Just to pick up on this bananas stuff, I understand process, I suppose, but we're writing a transportation plan, transportation master plan for the city of Ann Arbor. And the Transportation Commission is taking a backseat to all the goings-on. That just seems weird. So I don't know if there are ways around that, maybe requesting that Planning Commission have some joint meetings with the Transportation Commission. I assume there's going to be presentations to Planning Commission. Can we be a part of that? Not only a part, but officially a part of that? I appreciate Linda Diane's recommendation that we should be thinking about the future and changing things. But 10 years from now, frankly, I'm going to be 60 by then. I'm not going to care about this stuff as much. Right now, I want to make change, and this is the big document that's going to guide the city for the next decade. And Transportation Commission has virtually zero impact on it. That seems crazy to me.
Statutory impact.
No statutory impact. Fair enough. You're right. It's this divide between how we do things and how we're prescribed to do things and what makes sense. And we're a transportation commission that has no impact on the transportation plan. That's bananas.
And I'm just going to say, you will have a significant opportunity to have impact on the plan. To say that in the statutory process where this is really law in order to guide adoption of municipal master plans, our transportation plan is a significant element of our city's master plan. But the legislature, I'm not sure how many other cities in the state of Michigan would actually have a transportation commission. So they wrote this to apply to the majority. I agree with you that it would be bananas if we would not pay attention to the Transportation Commission. I think the suggestions of having conversation with the Planning Commission and whether they want to incorporate you as a body as part of their decision-making, that's a fair statement. But I really do want to encourage the commission to pay attention to the process, all the materials, engage, and then hopefully by the time we have the draft plan that runs the regulatory or administrative gauntlet, that you will feel comfortable that it reflects your strong desire to help guide the planning and decision-making for the next decade, if not beyond.
Great. Thanks, Eli. I feel better about it. Thank you.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
As a member of the City Planning Commission, and I also sit on this commission as well, I think if there are any items, even those parts which were discussed this evening, if a commissioner has questions or some concerns about it, I don't think you have to wait until later. I think Mr. Cooper is willing to take your comments, even if you see something this evening. You don't have to wait. And also, I'm not really aware of the Planning Commission, and I've been on it for quite a while, ever receiving input from another commission, whether it's Transportation or Environmental Commission or Energy Commission, that we did not certainly take in those comments and fully discuss them and make it a very open process. So I'm not concerned that because there's a statutory process, which has been described here, that it means that any commission in the city is being left out of the process. Because more important than what commission we sit on is the fact that we're citizens here, and as citizens, we have the loudest voice, and, you know, let's not ever minimize the power that's there, you know, even as a citizen sending forward your comments or your input in any of these decisions. So I think also around this table, we certainly, regardless of the political fury around us, that we do need to make sure that we're trusting each other, and the fact that we all have the city's best interests. I know I certainly do, and I would certainly believe that others around this table do as well. So I think as long as we're able to communicate, and let's not wait until, you know, it's so far down the line that then you feel like, well, nobody's going to pay attention to that. Certainly, if you have any kinds of concerns about it, I wouldn't hesitate to start that process right now. So
I very much appreciate that, and completely agree. Perhaps we could simply ask when the report goes out to planning that Transportation Commission also gets to see the actual report. I don't know, something like that. But I 100% agree that the folks on planning do wonderful work, and I don't want to question them at all, or other commission members. It's more about the divide between Transportation Commission and a transportation plan that seems odd. So thank you.
thank you.
Any other comments, questions? All right. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Stacy. See you guys in the morning. So a meeting is at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I will be here for that. I'm not going to spend the night here, though. So now we are talking about the crash data reporting, which we have the final report that did reflect a lot of the suggestions and questions that we had last time. Are there any comments about that? I found a typo, which I'm...
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I may, just to highlight some of the additions that were put in at your request. Lighting conditions were added to page 12. Distracted driving was added to page 14, and driving while under the influence was added on page 18. So I think those were some of the recommendations that came out last month that have now been
I appreciate
added
that.
to the report as well.
I also thought I noticed more bike-specific data as well.
Yeah, I
which
think you're
thank you
right.
for
I think we
that.
broadened that out as well.
Yeah, thank you.
On page 4, the U.S. Census data says that there were 11,000 people in 11,000-something people in Ann Arbor, which apparently there's a digit
No, I think
missing.
that the comma's just in the wrong spot. So if you see,
Okay.
it's 113,973, but where the comma's placed is a digit to the
Okay.
left. So you're right, it does look like 11,000, but I think all the numbers are there. It's just the punctuation's in the wrong spot. I did pick up on that myself. I was like, wait a second. So we'll correct that before the
Well,
final.
Eat, shoots, and leaves is a demonstration of how important punctuation is. I did think that a little bit more context of the percentage of distracted and impaired driving would be helpful to see, but it may be too late to add that in. Because it gives it in numbers, but not actual percentage of crashes. So I was just looking for a little bit more context, because it's actually fairly low, much lower than I expected it to be.
I can go back and see if we can add that to the
Okay.
report as well.
It's an amazing report that I want to send to everybody writing on Nextdoor.
I love those heat maps. I said it last month, I'll say it again. I love them. They're amazing.
Yes.
So, yeah, I took a look at it, and I thought it was amazing as well. Regarding the heat maps, I was wondering if we could add a range of values for the colors, or for each color have a range, or by temperature, from lowest temperature to highest temperature, so that people have an idea of what they're looking at as far as density. And then I know that it's difficult to add dimensions to a heat map, such as type of crash and severity. But I do think this is also something that would be great as an online interactive tool, so that you could filter by type of crash or severity and look at that by density as well as location, if that's something that you're planning to do in the future.
Yeah, let me start with the last recommendation. I think that's a great recommendation. We do have a Map Ann Arbor website, and so since these maps were actually generated through our GIS system, so we have them all uploaded, and so there might be an opportunity for us to migrate that online. In terms of your first recommendation, in terms of kind of adding the range of values, one of the things to note, and this is where it maybe gets a little confusing, the heat changes map by map based on kind of the density of the number of crashes, right? So you'll notice on some of the maps, just a couple points will turn it red or yellow. That's because just the overall number of crashes on that analysis aren't quite as many. But if you look at the very first map that shows total number of crashes, it takes quite a few dots to turn something bright yellow. And so because there's kind of a range, I actually brought this up to the GIS gentleman who worked on this, and he was explaining to me that it wasn't quite an easy scale to adopt, because the range, the way the GIS kind of quantifies it, it puts buffers around each of the spots, and then their proximity to one another, and since it's kind of a gradient, we were afraid of trying to put information out that could be misinterpreted, and so that's why we didn't put ranges out, especially since the ranges will change from map to map. So we discussed it. We couldn't come up with a good methodology, which is why those ranges aren't identified on the maps as presented.
Okay.
Any other comments? Appreciation for this being available. We might be able to highlight it on our Transportation Commission page as well. That might help us to direct people there, because I think it's really important information that would hopefully change driver behavior, and particularly people who are tailgating. Now I have data to stop people from tailgating when I'm a passenger. Okay. Thank you very much for that quick turnaround. I think we're ready to move on to the Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force. Recommendations, which, if I read that correctly, pretty much said it's being done or it's not relevant. So I wanted to discuss the very last point in the staff response, but what would you like to say about that? Ray, you look-
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I could just add a little bit more nuance to that. So, based on the conversation we had and the presentation we had last month about how we maintain pedestrian access ways through construction zones, we followed it up based on some of the conversation that was had and actually, put some of these ideas on paper. So, the short story is that there are existing requirements to maintain pedestrian ways through construction zones. The longer story is there are areas for improvement, and this memo does kind of highlight that. So, for example, one of the things that we say is that staff involved in construction review and barricade permits will begin coordination to establish guidelines for sidewalk closure with consideration to length of time, availability of adjacent space, and physical constraints. So, this idea being that, yes, on paper we have it, but in practice it hasn't always been carried through to the fullest extent possible. And now what we're doing, one of the good things about you poking us on this issue is we had a good meeting with kind of the different people that handle this area, right? Because there are right-of-way permits, there are construction permits, there are building permits. And so any number of different departments may actually touch a sidewalk closure. And so getting us all together to kind of talk about it and make sure we're consistent and that we set up kind of a methodology and a protocol in terms of what is acceptable and when it's not acceptable. In full disclosure, there are going to be times where we can't maintain a sidewalk open at all times through a construction area. And even the guidelines that are previously established and through the Pedestrian Safety Action Task Force identify some of those situations as well. So, there still will be full closures on at least one side of the street. But what can we do at a staff level to determine when and how that's acceptable versus when and how it's not? And so that's one of the things that we will start coordinating on and writing that into actually our permits and things of that nature. The other thing to note is, there was discussion about whether we can add different incentives to discourage closure of sidewalks. And I think this might be the point that you were making earlier. The only incentive we have is kind of an indirect incentive right now, which is if you maintain a sidewalk as being open and accessible, you don't require a barricade permit. And barricade permits can actually be quite expensive because they're assessed by day. And so you can imagine if you're going to close a sidewalk for an extended period of time, that barricade permit actually starts to escalate relatively quickly. But ultimately what we're saying is we're going to do a better job of enforcing kind of the rules that are on the books now, and that there's no addition, we don't need to incent it because it's required, is ultimately what that last point is trying to make in the memo. So yeah, that's kind of where we're coming from on the memo, and just wanted to share those thoughts with you so you had it, as part of your packet.
Thank you. That helps. I didn't read it that way exactly, so that clarifies it.
Oh, and the last thing I did want to highlight, the very last line of the memo indicates that we had put out a request for proposals in the past for a consultant to help us identify inconsistencies between our permits and code, because code has changed, but perhaps the paperwork and permits that are along with it haven't kept pace with it. When we did that RFP, the the responses that came back were more expensive than we were expecting, and so the project kind of died at that time. But you'll notice that there is a recommendation will be made to include this in a future budget. So it is something so that way we can make sure that our permits and all of that paperwork is consistent with what's identified in our code, and that is something that we'll put forward in a future budget proposal.
My other question is, who enforces this? So if there's a violation that's observed, who would you report it to, or?
So it kind of depends. If it's a violation in the public right-of-way, that would be the engineering department. We have right-of-way inspectors that are always out looking at job sites. But then if it's associated with a building, it could be part of the building department and the building inspectors. And then, there are other right-of-way closures. Sometimes, police may get involved, or community standards, depending upon kind of the nature of the situation. But for the most part, I would say it's probably one of those first two. It's the engineering inspectors or the building.
So C-Click Fix or community standards would be the two?
That would probably be the most efficient way, and then it can get routed appropriately.
Okay.
Question?
Yes.
And the memo, does it just fly off the table when we're talking about the University of Michigan? How does all that play in? Because I'm thinking about a lot of sidewalks that get, barricaded, or you can't go in certain areas. So who maintains that?
So I might look to Kayla to help me with that. We actually do have a process for site plans and projects that come from the university. It is different than what private development comes through, which, as you know, have to go through the planning commission. However, we do still own and maintain the right-of-way, so we do still have kind of control over that. And there is an opportunity for us to work with the university on, you know, whether those sidewalks are maintained or whether they're diverted or whatever the case may be. It's kind of a case-by-case basis, as this memo kind of indicates as well. But again, we'll try to do a better job of sticking to what's currently identified in our code to maintain those pedestrian access ways through construction zones, regardless of whether it's university project or private development.
And I guess, because the biggest example I'm thinking of right now is just there by the Union, where sidewalks are so blocked off that I'm just imagining if someone were handicapped or something like that, they have to travel almost around a whole city block just to get from, I don't know, Thompson Street to State Street at this point. And I think the last 2 days, it's even been blocked off around the Fleming Administration Building, so it's even a longer walk. And, you know, I was just thinking that it's really a barrier to, you know, for normal pedestrians, or, you know, pedestrians who are not handicapped, but certainly for anyone who's having a challenge. You know, I'm hard pressed to see how do they actually maneuver around a situation like that. So, if, you know, just
Point well
wanted to
taken,
bring that
yeah.
up.
And Wendy, I would just add, so part of what Raymond talked about the staff group that's going to get together to better establish what the guidelines are for sidewalk closures, that will apply to the University of Michigan, to city capital projects, to private development projects across the board. The point of that was that and I hope it came across in the memo, we recognize that it's not been consistent and that there's lots of room for improvement. And so, and back to Linda Diane's point about whether this memo is saying that we're already kind of doing it or not, we're recognizing that we need to do a better job. And this prompted us to pull a staff group together to have an initial discussion. And then we established kind of what next steps would be, but the University of Michigan impacts would be taken into consideration as well.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments? Great. Thank you for bringing that item back and the staff response. And we should, I could add that recommendations from that report, Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force, are still relevant, and it's good to review them every once in a while. So I appreciate that. So the next item is the CIP committee recommendations, which I'll ask Brad to briefly comment.
Sure,
And,
sure.
do we need a motion on this, Kayla, or, okay.
So some background, and then folks can weigh in or ask questions. So this is coming out of the original studies when it came to road diets, and that Platte Road from the Platte Y at Huron down to Packard, the traffic indicated that it was not viable to do a road diet. So I met with city engineers, including Cynthia and Cyrus, and we talked about alternatives, including Elmwood as a bicycle boulevard, as well as using some right-of-way southbound to connect to Canterbury, which is a neighborhood street that could serve as a network connector for folks heading west or further south. And this was their recommendation, to put this forward as a CIP project to move that connectivity along. I'm happy to go into greater detail, but I think that pretty much summarizes their recommendation and what I want to put forward, or the committee wants to put forward.
Okay.
Just to give me a little more context, is this like one of several different proposals you're putting forward, or this was deemed the most important, or?
This was deemed, this is the one based on the feedback, or I guess the city study of road diet possibilities. And this was a road diet that was denied, but it's a point of really important connectivity. And so I just took it upon myself to talk to city engineers to try to figure out an alternative way to connect these spaces. So frankly, it's me seeing it as important, but I think Cynthia and Cyrus would agree. But Kayla, you might have something.
Yeah, Julie, I just want to clarify for process with the CIP committee. The CIP committee is a standing committee of the Transportation Commission. And so they've made recommendations in the past, and this is one on the table currently, and there may be others in the future. It's not, there have been other committees that the commission has had where they developed some type of report or longer list of recommendations, and that was their final product. So just if that helps you understand why this may seem like a one-off one coming forward, that's because there was a presentation shared about road diets that sparked an interest, and it falls under, it's relevant to the CIP because it's currently not in the CIP, and this is a suggestion to add it. So hopefully that helps.
Yes.
Related to that, Councilmember Elizabeth Nelson and I have been discussing the possibility of creating a map so that there would be safe cycling routes that did not necessarily include some of the main streets, and that map would be produced so that people would be able to see that. And we've talked to a few community members about that.
Okay.
I just want to jump on and continue on that discussion. That, as some of you know who've been around for a long time, that is one of my passions, is connecting through non-arterial roadways. And that is part of my frustration as to the transportation plan that is currently being designed, that I have no idea if people are discussing neighborhood routes, bicycle boulevards. I mean, what a opportunity we have. And I just fear that, once again, we might just be bypassing that opportunity around schools, around parks, all that. Anyway, so this is a way to potentially do some infrastructure to help that.
Yes.
And do you think it's necessary to have a resolution from this body to make sure that's included? And one of the things that I've been talking about at the board table is we need to have the protected bike infrastructure on Washington Street as soon as possible, and possibly next year. I mean, that's the priority east-west cycling corridor. And so it might help if there was a resolution from the Transportation Commission to focus on both protected infrastructure as well as alternative roads. And what did you call them? Non-corridor?
Non-arterials.
Non-arterial, okay.
I don't think we should attach that to this
Oh, no, not the
discussion.
Washington.
But
Definitely.
I am happy, as folks know at this table, I am happy to discuss these possibilities. Protected bike lanes are really important for certain roadways. Bicycle boulevards are really important for certain roadways. Nothing is important for certain roadways. Every bicycle infrastructure piece is tied to the roadway characteristics that it's trying to solve. I'm happy to have a much larger discussion in terms of that.
So I'll suggest that we focus on this particular resolution at
that's
this
great.
time, and then there may also be additional agenda items or additional CIP recommendations, which would probably be best to put back to the committee for consideration and to bring up again. And I think that Washington is already on there, but pretty far in the future.
Washington as a bicycle boulevard is on the CIP. It does not go all the way through downtown, which
Right,
maybe is what
but-
Councilmember Griswold is discussing. And I will also say that signage and bike routing, I think, has a $50,000 CIP alignment at this point. So it's on the radar. It's not moving fast enough as far as I'm concerned, but there are movements in that
Okay.
direction.
So focusing on this particular recommendation, do you want to go ahead and make it as do you want to move this forward? Is it a motion for this?
I would put it forward as a motion, yeah, sure.
Okay. Seconded by Griswold. Any other discussion about this particular item?
Just a
Yes.
question. I would certainly be in favor of the resolution should we decide to vote on it. My question would be, has the CIP committee, do you have a sense of when Planning Commission is actually going to be looking at the capital improvements plan? Because that's something which comes up on a certain annual basis, and I don't think I've seen it coming up on our agenda anytime soon. And then on a biannual basis, we're doing certain things, really not really looking at it, item by item, that sort of thing. So I just wanted to see what the expectation would be. I mean, certainly I think if this is something that you want to send forward, then I'm certainly supportive of that. But I just didn't know where we are in terms of or if staff can tell us where we are in the cycle of approving the CIP.
I have to ask staff for that.
Yeah, Commissioner, thank you for that question, because I was actually going to say something to that effect as well. So this is an off-year cycle with the CIP. So CIPs tend to be a 2-year initiative. A major update is done every other year. So this year is kind of, for lack of a better term, like a cleanup year, where there are adjustments made to existing projects for the most part. Projects that, for example, we will identify projects that we sought grant funding for, and if that grant funding wasn't realized, then that changes in the CIP. So that's an example of, we applied for a Highway Safety Improvement Program grant that we didn't get. That project will still probably remain in the CIP, but it'll be pushed out. So I say all that to say that kind of a new project, I think, the commission can make the recommendation now, but it may not manifest until kind of the full update, since it's a new project being added. So I did want to temper expectations on that, so that you're all aware about, if you don't see it right away, it'll be kind of in the queue for the next time we do a major revision. But that shouldn't stop you from making decisions on that today.
And I just want to say that I think much of it can be achieved with very little funding
But maybe.
relative to.
Depends on my vision.
Well, we could at least start it.
Yeah,
with-
we could at least start.
Okay.
But in terms of timeline, I understand this is a long process.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get it on the books so that when planning does consider the next time around, that they have a recommendation to go ahead and proceed. I understand this is a year and a half out, probably even to discuss on CIP, and it's probably 5 years out to actually do it.
Start somewhere.
So got to start somewhere.
Any other comments on this resolution before us? Then we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And we've got agenda setting in just a minute, so let's postpone the other part of that, which is to put some other items on our future agenda that are related to this. Okay? So we are to the transportation project updates, I believe. Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair, and for the benefit of our new commissioner, it's common practice for us to just highlight. We produce a pretty extensive list of all the different transportation projects that are ongoing. What I do on a month-by-month basis is I just highlight the changes from month to month. So all of this might look new to you, but you'll see that I won't highlight all of them. I'll just kind of highlight the things that have changed from last month. So starting on page 1, there's mention that the Ann Arbor Saline asphalt path reconstruction is now complete. Further down, there's discussion about the annual street resurfacing projects. That work is currently occurring in Water Hill neighborhood on Traverwood Drive and the asphalt path adjacent to Huron High School. Moving down to page 3, we do include the updates that we provide to council in terms of the pedestrian crosswalk improvements that were made. You'll note that there are 5 new RRFBs that were installed on Maple, Eisen, and Eisenhower. Under Allen Creek berm opening, there is some added language that the cost came in a little bit higher than we were expecting, but we do anticipate to move forward with that. But it'll push the schedule back. So we expect construction to start in spring of 2020 and be completed by the end of 2020. The Duvarn sidewalk gap is underway and is scheduled to be completed around the end of September. The Hoover Hill Green improvement is now shifted its focus to the north part of Green and Hill Street. The Washtenaw Pittsfield crosswalk, there's language in there that the crosswalk work, the concrete work for the crosswalk is done, and we're currently waiting on some parts for the pedestrian signal to finalize that work. Pretty much everything is there, ready to go and ready to be flipped on, but we just have to get a couple more widgets to put in the box, and I don't know what a widget is because I'm not technical enough. My sign crew would know better than me. It's not really called a widget, I'm just using that. Barton Drive, just a quick little announcement. There isn't really a change here, but there is a public meeting tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. at Northside Steam related to the Barton Drive project. On the Hollywood project, there is a meeting scheduled for October 2nd. That was an update previously scheduled for September 12th, so October 2nd at 6 p.m. On the road diets, the road diet language has been updated to reflect council's decisions related to Earhart Green and Traverwood. Traverwood was approved. Your report doesn't reflect this yet because it just happened 2 days ago, but Traverwood was approved with the original configuration with on-street parking on Monday night. So next month's report will reflect that change. Ann Arbor Station, the final draft of the environmental assessment incorporating all the responses that we've heard from Federal Railroad Administration has been submitted to the Federal Railroad Administration. It is currently under their review, so that was submitted about 2 weeks ago. So keep your fingers crossed that we've addressed all the things that they've asked us to address, and we can move forward with the public review period after we get the green light from them on that. Traffic calming, another public meeting that's happening tomorrow is the Crest Avenue traffic calming project. We're doing the on-site meeting with the neighbors out there tomorrow night. So we're busy tomorrow night between Barton and Crest. There's a lot going on. Transportation plan update, you heard from Eli and Stacy this evening, but there's a little bit of added language there. Lower Town Mobility Study, this was awarded by council on September 3rd. And that project is expected to kick off in the ensuing months. Right now, we're just circulating the contract for signature. And the only other thing to note is under dedicated funding of staff under the Speed Reduction Committee recommendations, there's a one-liner that research on job descriptions from other communities is currently underway for the new senior engineer position. And that is the last of the updates in the report.
Could I ask
Yes.
a quick question? So I used to notice on this report, updates of crosswalk at Thayer on Huron, and I don't see it anymore. Did I just not find it, or what's the update on that?
Yeah, so, yeah, it should be on there. I don't know if it got eliminated, it was by accident. So the lighting was installed. Right now, we're still waiting to hear from MDOT in terms of what their schedule is to upgrade that. As I understand it, that's going to be upgraded to a pedestrian hybrid beacon. Some of you also know that as a Hawk. That's what MDOT has expressed as their preference for that location. Last I heard, it was in their design team to come up with that. And so, yeah.
So we still don't know when?
We still don't know when. We are told that it's this fiscal year. The state operates on a federal fiscal year, so their federal fiscal year just started October 1st, runs through September 30th. So we're in the right fiscal year, but it could be as late as September 29th.
Yeah. And is the Hawk at the Y still getting turned into a regular streetlight?
We don't have a final determination on that, as I understand it.
And that update's provided under heading that says MDOT coordination.
Oh,
I don't know if
okay.
it was previously on its own and now has been lumped together.
Thank you, Kate.
That's on page 8.
Thanks.
Anything else? Great. Then we have a memo from Reimagining Washtenaw, which I think we could just accept, but if there are any questions or comments on that? Seeing none, Then we'll go on to liaison reports. If those people representing a particular entity have a report to make. Yes.
Yeah, Commission on Disability Issues, we met today, and we started talking about the state crosswalk law that we talked about a couple months ago here. And it seems like, because Erica Briggs came to us, obviously expressing her concerns, and then we were essentially ended up getting into discussion. We want to talk to Councilmember Griswold and Ronnie Peterson to find out what's happening with that, because there is obviously concern about the idea of having to step out into the street, but there's been, I know I've heard there's since been some talk of amending the state's white cane law that might actually allow people with a wheelchair to use one to get the things to stop. I mean, I don't know, I mean, there's still, it sounds like there might be some different opinions on the commission as far as where they want to go with the recommendation, and as far as, there is concern about it as is. And, but yeah, so we had that discussion a bit late because they did not meet during July and August, and, but yeah, it sounds like we're going to have a bigger discussion and perhaps a recommendation in October.
Okay. That's good to know about. Yes, do you have a report, or?
Ronnie Peterson, his chief of staff, Joe Taylor, Erica Briggs, and I met on Monday morning about this. And there is a white cane law, and it's only in the Uniform Traffic Code. It's not in the Michigan Vehicle Code. And so Representative Ronnie Peterson asked me to submit that language, and we also talked about adding not only white cane, but also a person in a wheelchair, and to just defer to the Michigan Department of Transportation to identify what a wheelchair is, because, there are motorized scooters, and there's lots of differences in terms of what equipment might be needed. And then I was thinking also about electric bicycles. For some people, I don't know what category that would be. So anyway, it is very complex.
Okay. Any other liaison reports? Yes.
More of an announcement, as I mentioned last meeting, AAA is undergoing its long-range plan. And as promised, I've got a date for public consultation for the Ann Arbor area, October 23rd, from 5:30 to 8 at the library. And then we'll also be doing pop-ups at the Blake Transit Center on October 15th from 3 to 5:30, and November 7th from 7:30 in the morning till 10 in the morning.
Great.
Thank you.
Is that the downtown library?
Yes.
So if you might be willing to jot that down for Kayla so she can distribute to us, that would be great, too.
Deal.
Any other liaison reports? And communication from commissioners? Yes.
One of the things that I've been doing as part of my 6E evaluation project, and maybe it was supposed to be over and I just didn't know it, but I've continued to work on it, is looking at the monthly crash data for 2019. So I have it through August, and I want to thank staff for that information, and they're continuing to refine it to include the categories that Vision Zero uses, as well as a better understanding of the direction of the vehicle. And I'm really surprised at the number of pedestrian crashes resulting from left turns. And if anyone's interested, I can try to get that in a reportable format in the next few days.
Okay. Other commission reports? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to next agenda items. I don't know if somebody can sort of sum up what we're talking about for a future agenda item having to do with the information that came up around the resolution. What are we looking for there?
I can maybe summarize some. I mean, sorry, I have 3 agenda items, and I'll just go through.
Go ahead.
and we can talk about it. The summary language maybe will come to me as I think an agenda item that's a presentation on the current transportation plan, once it's ready to go to Planning Commission, should be also introduced to this group in a formal presentation with feedback. I think that's worthy. Picking up from the parking discussion, I am very curious in terms of the partnership that we have with the University of Michigan, and how does University of Michigan owned roads versus Ann Arbor owned roads, parking, all that kind of stuff. I don't understand really how that works and maybe what's at play. And because there's so much integration there that it might be good for this body to weigh in. I don't know. I don't know enough to actually have a recommendation, but so it would be an informational
Okay.
meeting. And then the final, I suppose, the summary of what came up earlier is some sort of investigation or presentation on neighborhood bikeways, bicycle boulevards, and low-stress networks as bicycle infrastructure. There's lots of cities that are doing this, so I think somebody could put something together, as well as include some examples around town. I don't know, Kathy, does that sort of?
So if you let Kayla know some of the desired outcomes from that, we can put it on as an agenda item.
Yeah, I think that's cool.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, there seems to be many opportunities for significant improvement at almost no cost. And if we at least had the map and had these routes outlined, then we'd know what funding we did need.
So is that an agenda item, or?
That's just to clarify what Bradley said.
Okay. All right, if you think of other agenda items, let us know. The agenda setting is usually the first Friday of the month, which Molly has been participating in. So there's at least 3 or 4 of us. Great.
I can add what's on the, well, actually, they're not items on the work plan. Well, one that's on the work plan is Ann Arbor Station update, and so as Raymond said, we are kind of waiting to hear back from FRA, so I believe, don't know yet whether that will be ready for October or not. But if there's something to report, then we'll determine whether or not it's sufficient to provide through the staff report updates, or if there's something to share as a presentation to the commission. But 2 additional items that were not on the work plan, but staff have approached me wanting to bring to the Transportation Commission for October. One is the Barton Drive, the project, the resurfacing and water main replacement, where there's the public meeting taking place tomorrow night that's in that neighborhood, but to bring information to the commission specifically. And also the sidewalk gap project or prioritization effort that the city has underway. There's revised criteria and weighting that staff would like to bring to the commission.
Okay. The next meeting is October 16th, and it will be right here at the 2nd floor of City Council Chambers, starting at 7 p.m. and hopefully ending by 9. Everybody's invited. If there are no other items, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.